Two young men, both devoted to their faith, meet inside the Mormon church. Their bond starts as a deep friendship, but soon, feelings emerge that neither of them can ignore. Caught between their beliefs and their hearts, they must face a truth that could change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this. Stories about love, courage, and the struggle to be true to oneself. Now let's dive into this powerful journey of love, faith, and self-discovery. I never questioned my place in the church. For as long as I could remember, my life had revolved around the gospel, the scriptures, the church meetings, and the unwavering expectations of my family. I was raised to be devoted, to follow the path set before me, to prepare for my mission, and, someday, to build a righteous family of my own. I had convinced myself that this was all I ever needed. Until he arrived. It was a Sunday morning like any other. The chapel was filled with familiar faces, dressed in white shirts and ties, murmuring quiet greetings as the service began. I sat beside my parents, flipping absently through my Book of Mormon, already knowing what the lesson would be. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, a new face. He stood near the entrance, speaking with the bishop. He was tall, lean, his dark brown hair neatly combed, his suit crisp and well-fitted. But it wasn't just his appearance that caught my attention. It was the way he carried himself, calm, confident, but with something unreadable in his eyes, like he was both completely sure of himself and somehow lost. I forced myself to look away. New members weren't unusual. People moved in and out of our ward all the time. But why did I feel so drawn to him? The meeting began. The hymns were sung, the prayers were spoken, and the bishop welcomed the congregation. I barely listened. My mind was stuck on the stranger. Then, as if the universe itself were playing some cruel joke on me, the bishop said his name. "We'd like to welcome a new member to our ward today. Everyone, please say hello to Elijah Foster." Elijah. The name hit me like a wave. Simple, strong, and suddenly deeply significant. He smiled politely as a few people turned to greet him. Then, for a brief second, his eyes met mine. My breath hitched. It was only a moment, a fleeting glance. But in that instant, something shifted inside me. I tore my gaze away, my heart pounding. What the hell was that? I had always been good at control. I had spent years perfecting it, shutting down any thoughts, any feelings that didn't align with what I was taught to believe. But for the first time, I felt like I was losing that control, and I had no idea what to do about it. I told myself it was nothing. A glance, a fleeting moment of curiosity. That's all it was. But as the days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Elijah Foster. His name echoed in my mind at random times, during morning prayers, during scripture study, even when I was helping the missionaries. And every Sunday when I walked into the chapel, my eyes instinctively searched for him before I even realized what I was doing. It wasn't long before I learned more about him. He had recently moved from Idaho, transferring to our ward with his family. His father had been called as one of the new High Council members. He was my age, 23, and had just returned from his mission in South America. Everyone in the ward seemed drawn to him. He was charismatic, effortlessly charming, and spoke about the gospel with conviction that even I envied. But there was something else about him, something I couldn't figure out. One afternoon, after our weekly church activity, I found myself alone in the cultural hall, stacking chairs. Most of the others had already left, but I had stayed behind to help clean up. And then, he walked in. "Hey!" Elijah's voice was warm, easy, as he grabbed a chair and began folding it. I felt my body tense, but I forced a polite smile. "Hey, you don't have to help. I got it." He shrugged. "Figured I'd keep you company." I nodded, unsure what else to say. We worked in silence for a while. the sound of chairs scraping against the polished floor filling the empty space. I tried to focus on the task in front of me, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Finally, he spoke again. "You're Luke, right?" "Yeah." He nodded. "I've seen you around. You seem dedicated." I frowned slightly. "Is that a bad thing?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not at all. Just interesting." I couldn't tell if he was complimenting me or challenging me. I set down the last chair and turned to face him. Big mistake. Standing this close, I could see every detail. The way his dark eyes flickered with something unreadable. The way his lips curled slightly, like he was always on the verge of saying something he shouldn't. And then it happened. A small brush of his hand against mine. It was nothing. An accident. Barely a touch. But it sent a jolt through my entire body. I snatched my hand away quickly, stepping back before I could stop myself. My heart slammed against my ribs, heat rising to my face. Elijah noticed. His expression flickered, just for a second, before a slow, almost knowing smile formed on his lips. I needed to leave. Now. "I should go," I blurted out, already heading for the door. "Luke." I froze. He wasn't teasing me. His voice was softer now, almost hesitant. Like he knew. Like he was waiting for me to admit it. I couldn't. I turned and walked away, my pulse racing, because for the first time in my life I had no idea who I was praying to resist. God or him. I avoided him for an entire week. It wasn't easy. Our ward wasn't that big, and Elijah had already started making a name for himself, helping with the youth group, volunteering for scripture readings, even sitting at the front during priesthood meetings. But every time I saw him, I felt that same pull, and I hated it. I threw myself deeper into church activities, prayed harder, worked longer, and tried to forget. It didn't work, because no matter how much I fought it, he was always there. Sunday arrived faster than I wanted it to. I walked into the chapel, determined to stay focused. My parents smiled at me, proud as ever, and I took my usual seat near the front. And then, he sat next to me. I stiffened. "Morning," Elijah said, like nothing was wrong. I forced myself to nod. "Morning." The meeting began, but I wasn't listening. How could I when he was right there? Every time he shifted in his seat, every time he turned a page in his scriptures, I felt it. This unbearable tension that coiled inside me like a secret I wasn't allowed to have. Then came the worst part. The prayer. We were asked to bow our heads. I closed my eyes, hands resting on my lap, trying to focus on the words being spoken. And then I felt it. His knee brushed against mine. A mistake. An accident. Just like before. But he didn't move away. My heart pounded. I kept my eyes shut, pretending I didn't notice. Pretending that my entire body wasn't reacting to something as simple as this. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. When the prayer ended, I forced myself to breathe. Elijah sat still, his expression unreadable. Then, just as the meeting ended, he leaned in slightly. "So," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "are you going to keep running?" I snapped my head toward him. His eyes, calm, unwavering, held something deeper. A challenge. A truth we weren't supposed to speak. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice sounded thin, weak. Elijah's lips quirked, almost like he was amused. "Sure you don't." And then he was gone. I sat there, unable to move. Because he was right, I was running. But from what? From him? From myself? Or from the truth I was too afraid to face? I barely made it through the week. Every time I walked into the chapel, every time I joined a church activity, I felt his eyes on me. Not in an obvious way, not in a way anyone else would notice, but I felt it. And worse, I found myself searching for him too. I hated that. I hated how easy it was for Elijah to act like nothing was happening. He talked to everyone, smiled at the bishop, shook hands with missionaries. He was perfect. Exactly what a good Mormon was supposed to be. Except for the way he looked at me. Like he knew something I didn't. Like he was waiting. By the time Friday rolled around, I was exhausted from pretending. That night, there was a church gathering at one of the members' homes. A small bonfire, some music, nothing unusual. I told myself I wouldn't go. But of course I did. And of course so did Elijah. The moment I saw him, my pulse spiked. He was standing near the fire, laughing at something one of the other guys said, his face illuminated by the flickering light. I should have stayed away. Instead, I grabbed a soda, took a deep breath, and walked right into the storm. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that this was nothing. That he was nothing. That whatever this was would disappear if I just acted normal. I sat near a group of friends, pretending to be invested in their conversation. But my ears were tuned to him. Then it happened. One of the guys suggested a game. Something stupid, a mix between tag and hide and seek in the woods behind the house. Everyone agreed. We split into teams. And somehow I ended up alone with Elijah. I swallowed hard as we walked into the dark woods, the distant voices of the others fading behind us. Elijah was too calm, too collected. I wasn't. "You've been avoiding me," he said suddenly. I scoffed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elijah let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "You keep saying that." Silence stretched between us. The night air was cold, the only light coming from the distant glow of the bonfire. The shadows around us felt heavier than they should. I turned away. "We should keep moving." Before I could take another step, his hand caught my wrist. I froze. His grip wasn't forceful. It was gentle, steady, like he was testing me, waiting to see if I would pull away. I should have. I didn't. For the first time, I let myself look at him. Really look. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, they held something deep, something undeniable. "This isn't just in my head, is it?" he asked, voice low. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because I didn't have an answer, because I didn't know how to lie to him anymore. A noise in the distance made me jolt back. Laughter. Someone calling out. The spell between us broke. Elijah exhaled, his hand slipping away from my wrist, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "This isn't over, Luke." And with that, he turned and walked ahead, leaving me standing there, breathless. I clenched my fists, my heart racing. What the hell am I doing? I didn't sleep that night. Even after I got home, after I showered, after I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for hours, my mind refused to quiet. "This isn't over, Luke." His words ran through me like a slow burn, like a challenge I wasn't ready to accept. But the worst part wasn't what he said. It was that he was right. I could feel it every time I looked at him. Every time our eyes met in the chapel, every time I found myself watching him when I thought no one else was looking. I was losing control. By Sunday, I was a mess. I told myself I wouldn't talk to him, wouldn't sit near him, wouldn't even look at him. I had to prove to myself that I was stronger than this. But then came the worst possible moment. The bishop asked me and Elijah to meet after the service. I felt my stomach drop. We stood outside his office, waiting. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure Elijah could hear it. He stood next to me, arms crossed, completely relaxed.
"You okay?" he asked, glancing at me. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, why?" he smirked. "Because you look like you're about to pass out." I let out a short, forced laugh. "I'm fine," he hummed like he didn't believe me. The bishop called us in. He smiled, motioning for us to sit. "Thank you both for staying behind," he said. "I have been thinking about how much our youth could benefit from strong leaders. And you two, well, you're both faithful, committed, and respected in the ward." My breath hitched. I knew where this was going. "We'd like to assign you both as youth mentors for the younger boys in the congregation. You'll work together, planning activities, guiding them spiritually, being role models." My throat went dry. "Together." I nodded automatically, forcing a smile. "Of course, Bishop. I'd be honored." Elijah, to my horror, looked amused. "Yeah, sounds great." We left the office in silence. The moment we were alone, Elijah turned to me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Guess you're stuck with me now." I groaned, running a hand through my hair. "This isn't funny." He laughed. "It kind of is." I started walking away, but he grabbed my arm. That same steady grip. I froze. He lowered his voice. "You can keep pretending, Luke. Keep avoiding me. Keep lying to yourself." I pulled my arm back, heat rising to my face. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are." Silence. My pulse pounded in my ears. His eyes searched mine, and for a second, I saw something raw in them. Something vulnerable. I didn't know if I wanted to run or stay there forever. "Elijah." My voice barely worked. He stepped closer. Just an inch, but it was enough. "Tell me to stop." I couldn't. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. His gaze flickered to my lips, just for a second. Then, just as fast, he stepped back. "I thought so." And with that, he walked away, leaving me standing there, shaken, confused, and completely wrecked. I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about." His lips quirked into a small, sad smile. "Yeah, there is." Silence stretched between us. The last thing I wanted was to be alone with him again, but at the same time, I couldn't look away. Finally, I sighed, unlocking the door. He slid into the passenger seat, his presence too much, too close. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The parking lot was quiet now, the last few members of the ward driving away. Then Elijah exhaled softly. "You're scared." I flinched. "I'm not." He gave me a knowing look. "Luke." I clenched my jaw. "I don't know what you're trying to do." "I'm not trying to do anything." His voice was calm, patient. I see you. And I think, maybe for the first time in your life, you're seeing yourself too." Something in my chest snapped. I turned to him, eyes burning. "You don't know anything about me." Elijah didn't flinch. "I know you can't even look me in the eyes when you say that." I hated him. Because he was right. Because he saw everything I tried to hide. And because, deep down, I wanted him to. I swallowed hard, my breath unsteady. I can't do this." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "I'm not asking you to." I looked at him then. Really looked. For so long, I had thought I was alone in this. That no one could understand. That whatever was inside me was something broken, something wrong. But Elijah's eyes told me otherwise. "I know what it's like," he said, "to grow up in this church, to believe every word, to want to be good, to beg God to take away the things that don't fit." He let out a soft, bitter laugh. I spent years praying that one day I'd wake up and be different, that I'd stop feeling... He stopped himself, shaking his head. My heart pounded. And did you? His gaze flickered to mine, something raw in his expression. No. Silence. He looked away, exhaling sharply. I fought it for so long, hated myself for it. But at some point, I had to ask myself, if God is love, then why did I only feel like I was dying inside? His words hit like a gut punch. I had asked myself that same question more times than I could count. I just never let myself answer it. I leaned back against the seat, my hands shaking slightly. How do you live with it? Elijah looked at me then, his expression both sad and knowing. You stop running. The words sent a chill down my spine. I had spent my whole life running. From the thoughts, from the feelings, from myself. But here, sitting in my car with him, I felt something shift, something terrifying, something freeing. I took a slow, shaky breath. I don't know if I can. Elijah nodded, his eyes soft. Then I'll wait. I swallowed the lump in my throat. He started to reach for my hand, but stopped, hesitating, giving me a choice. For the first time, I let myself want it. I turned my palm up, meeting him halfway. The second our hands touched, I felt it. A quiet, unshakable truth. This wasn't wrong. It was just real. And maybe that was enough. Love isn't something you can pray away. It isn't something you can run from forever. No matter how much Luke tried to fight it, deny it, or bury it under his faith, the truth was always there, waiting to be seen. How many of us have felt the same? Have you ever been afraid to face your own truth? To accept the love you deserve? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the journey to self-acceptance is never easy, but sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most beautiful ones.